YouTube channel. But today we are going into a subject that I love. I love this race. This probably won't be longer than 9 or 10 minutes, but it's just going to be a look back at probably the best finish in Richmond history. And Richmond isn't a track that's always produced great racing or crazy moments. And the most memorable moment from Richmond probably in the last decade was Spingate. There just haven't been just a ton of great, huge moments at Richmond. But there was one, and this was a race that two of Dale Earnhardt's most iconic moments stem from this race, as well as Kyle Petty's first career win. But those Earnhardt moments are him cleaning his own windshield while driving the car under caution, and of course his infamous wreck with Darrell Waltrip that kind of was in the middle of their feud. They came to be great friends, especially towards the twilight of their respective careers. But this was the tipping point in that rivalry. So we're just going to go through this, talk about it, maybe 8 or 9 minutes, but just kind of relax you, talk about some history, and then tomorrow me and Emily will be back to preview Richmond, recap COTA, and recap all the news from the week. So this race was the Miller High Life 400. This happened in February of 1986. We got three main characters that we really need to talk about. The first one was the winner of the race, that being Kyle Petty. Petty came into Cup in 1979, I believe, when he was 18 years old. He made his first start that year at Talladega, driving for his dad, but kind of branched out, even only going into, his 7th, 8th full-time year at this point. He was already considered a bit of a journeyman driver. He had yet to win, and everybody was saying, okay, he's the son of the king. When is he going to get that win? At this point, his dad had already won his record-setting 200th race, had already won 7 500s, already won 7 championships. So his dad's career was, or winning career at least, was over. But he himself really hadn't found victory lane yet. He was with a team that had done it a ton of times. Today, the Wood brothers have won 99 Cup races. We'll see if it's Harrison Burton or somebody else that delivers number 100, but they've won multiple Daytona 500s. And, obviously their best period of success came with David Pearson. But now after Pearson left, they were looking for some talent, and they found Kyle Petty. He wasn't driving the famed 21, however. He was actually driving the number 7 because before Alan Kulwicki came in a few years later and made that number 7 famous, Kyle Petty was driving it, and driving it for the Wood brothers only because of his sponsor, 7-Eleven. That was a contract. That was an obligatory clause in the contract that, hey, run the number 7. It'll really help promote the gas station. And so they did. They did run the number 7 with Kyle Petty. And Richmond, before it was in March and April, before on the 8th, 9th, 10th race of the year category like it is now, it's actually the 7th race of the year this year. I always remember it as race 9, right after Bristol or Martinsville, somewhere around there, part of that short, Virginia, Tennessee short track swing. Where it is now. But going into Richmond, it's in February. I believe this race was on February 25th, 1986. And the two other main stories are Darrell Waltrip and Dale Earnhardt. So let's set the stage here. Dale Earnhardt at this point in 1986. 1986 was his 8th year driving in the NASCAR Cup Series full-time. He was at that time, only a one-time series champ, right? Yes. In 1986 would be the year that he won his 2nd championship, if I'm correct here. Let's see, 1986 NASCAR, I believe that was Earnhardt. That was definitely Earnhardt, right? Oh, dear. Hang on a minute. It was Dale. Okay, that was his 2nd championship. That was his first one with Richard Childress. The next year, 87, I believe that was the year where he won it by 400 points or some ridiculous mark like that. But Dale, he was obviously one of the best drivers in the garage. Driving for Richard Childress, who really stepped up his program. Oh, we hit 200 total podcast downloads. That's pretty neat. But driving for Richard Childress, and so... driving for Childress, he was in a good spot. And that would be the year that he would win his second Cup Series championship. The next year, in 87, he'd win his third. In 1990, 1991, he'd win his fourth and fifth, respectively. In 1993, 1994, he'd win his sixth and seventh, respectively. But 86 was the year he would win his second. So he's kind of on the rise. And finally, you have Darrell Waltrip, Jaws. He had actually just won his last championship. He won 3, all of them driving for Junior Johnson. First 2 was with the Dew Crew, and then Budweiser came along. And this was a race where, Junior Johnson, being ever present as he was not happy with Dale Earnhardt after it, to say the least. I'm going to play the audio in just a second of that crash. But the way these three guys are intermingled, obviously we have Dale Earnhardt under caution, cleaning mud off his windshield, which was awesome, which was hilarious. But the big incident in this race that everybody remembers, I think it was 3 or 4 laps to go. It's Earnhardt versus Waltrip. They've been sliding their cars around all day, making contact all day, hitting each other, sliding off each other, banging off each other. And, it was great racing. It was great fun. It was a very typical 1980s NASCAR Cup Series short track race. And so they're banging off each other. They're hitting each other. Earnhardt's not happy with Waltrip. Waltrip's not happy with Earnhardt. And going into turn 3, really like halfway down the backstretch, Dale Earnhardt just kind of right hooks and turns Darrell Waltrip. Probably going 110, 120-ish in the corners, maybe even faster than that. I'm not exactly sure. Richmond at that time was only a half mile rather than 3/4 of a mile like it is now before the fairgrounds. It was the Richmond Fairgrounds Speedway, and then Richmond really got an upgrade, I believe. Was it the late 80s, or I believe it was the late 80s or very early 90s that Richmond kind of turned into the Richmond that we know today rather than the half-mile fairgrounds track. But, yeah, they slammed into the wall. Neither of them were really hurt that bad. Earnhardt had some bruises, and he also had blurred vision. But what hurt the most was that they didn't win the race. They both lost the race. And, yes, this one was on Dale Earnhardt. As much as we like to almost worship and idolize Dale Earnhardt, you can't pretend that he was a man with no faults, that he didn't do anything wrong in NASCAR in his NASCAR career. And yeah, he wrecked Darrell Waltrip. He flat out right hooked him. Like, there's no other way to put it than that. There's really not. So he did that, and he held his ground. I mean, you can't say he didn't hold his ground. But, yeah, Dale Earnhardt turns Darrell Waltrip. Kyle Petty is the benefactor. He comes through and ultimately wins the race under caution. His first career win. I wish I could say that it spurred a King-esque-like career for Kyle Petty, but it really didn't. He would go on to only win 8 races. He'd win his last race 9 years later in 1995 at Dover, a year where even though he won a race, he still finished 30th in points, and he stayed around that 30th mark until he retired in 2008. So that's really the rundown. Interestingly, both his first and last wins were sponsored by beer companies. So that's kind of the story of it. Obviously, there's people who have told it much more eloquently, and in a much longer version than that. But I just kind of want to do something fun today. It's Richmond weekend. When you go to Martinsville, when you go to more historical tracks, I'll probably do these more often. But then, Martinsville, maybe when you go to, Talladega, Charlotte for the World 600. So I'm going to do that. So now to end this podcast off, I'm going to play the audio of the Waltrip and Earnhardt crash. Let y'all listen to that. Thank you all for listening. If you're on YouTube, like, subscribe, comment, share. Check out the Spotter Shane YouTube channel for a ton of NASCAR news and pre- and post races for all 3 series. And if you're listening, you can listen to us on YouTube and also Spotify, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music, Stitcher, TuneIn, wherever you get your podcast. So thank you all for listening. And now the audio of the finish of the 1986 Miller High Life 400 crash between Dale Earnhardt and Darrell Waltrip. Ending alive.